Welcome to episode 44 of the Half Point Per podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and super producer, Johnny Pham. And guys, I know we've made it 44 episodes, but I've got to say, I think this is my last episode of the podcast. I have recently received an offer to go play high school football at this place called Bishop Sycamore. Just got some paperwork stuff to push through. That they just say it's semantics, some stuff they got to figure out on their end. But after that, I think I'm in.
I'm proud of you. I'm glad you got the offer. They kind of ghosted me. I applied. I didn't hear anything back. Must have sent it to the wrong address.
Hard to know what the correct address would be, right?
There is no address.
I didn't even get invited to apply, so I'm a little hurt.
I asked what position they want me to play. They're like, we don't care. We'll see when you get here. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I think this might be it.
Well, I think every position's pretty open at this point. I saw a couple of those guys have arrest warrants out for them.
Well, we've got Cam Newton at quarterback, and we fill in around him. I think going forward, I think we're looking pretty good.
I can't wait to see you beat up on high schoolers or get beat up on by high schoolers, maybe.
If anybody somehow missed this story, Bishop Sycamore, which a school that like nobody had ever heard of, somehow duped its way. I haven't read like exactly how, although I don't even know if reading how would actually help me understand how it happened. Somehow duped their way onto ESPN to play against IGN, IMG, game company, IMG Academy, which basketball and football, like that is one of the top schools in the country. And this team got absolutely pulverized. It was like 30-year-old men getting destroyed by like 17-year-old high school kids. That might be the wildest story of 2021 for me. That is saying something.
I don't know if you saw, there's a video of them talking to the running back. They're talking to him on the sideline, and this guy has a full-on mustache and looks like a 30-year-old man. And I just don't understand how they got far enough to play on the same field. It's just ridiculous.
They all must have turned in their I am 12 with the $5 bill or $10 bill or whatever it is, like off bench warmers. I mean that's literally like what feels like happened here.
Oh, it is absurd.
I feel bad for the announcers. I don't know if you guys looked that much into it, but they're like, it was a disaster. Like many of the players just had a number, didn't know.
There's like a guy that got hurt, and they had no idea who he was.
Number 54.
Yeah, he's not on our call sheet.
That's all we know.
Well, we've got some, we'll say, more real football, but still fake football to talk about in fantasy football here today. As I kind of alluded to last week, we've got a little bit of Dynasty talk for the first time, I think, all off season. We kind of figured this was a good week to do it. Dalton and I each brought 3 guys to watch in your Dynasty leagues, and these are deep. They're not necessarily undrafted Dynasty guys, but they are undrafted in redraft. So unless you're in Dynasty, you are likely not thinking of these guys. And then all 3 of us are bringing our 3 favorite over-under bets. And I don't know about you guys, but I definitely cheated and have like other bets. I tried not to do maybe the more mainstream ones I'm pretty confident one of you guys will have, so we could have something different. But we should at least have 8 or 9 different bets to talk about. But unfortunately, on a pretty sad note, we do have a couple injuries to start us off with. The first is J.K. Dobbins. You have obviously heard by now if you're listening to this podcast. Tore his ACL in the all-important 3rd preseason game. He is out for the season. Hopefully he will be back and make a full recovery for next year. It seems like most guys do. If not next year, the year after. He should be back and mostly his normal self. But Dalton, it's obviously major rumor in Dynasty, but especially if you already did your redraft league, or like I was joking about with you, like it happened at a time where you legitimately could have drafted them like an hour before it happened. And it's just a gut punch to lose a guy who was probably your 2nd round pick, maybe your 3rd round pick this early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible. It's definitely the 2nd worst injury we've seen this season behind Cam Akers as far as fantasy goes. And I mean, the good news is he's young, and I don't really think an ACL tear is going to hold him back from a good career. But I guess it's Gus the Bus forward. I don't necessarily have Gus the Bus rated as close as Dobbins. I think there's still a difference in skill there and quality.
Mm-hmm.
And also with Dobbins, there was still, a tidbit of hope that their receiving upside came around. And I just don't think that exists with Gus at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was going to ask, I haven't actually redone my ranks, but I have a pretty good idea of where I would slot Gus Edwards. I don't know if you've redone yours, or if you would, where do you think you'd have Gus Edwards at right now?
I think I have to put him in the top 24, but I'd probably have him like 22 or 23. I haven't redone them yet, but I would still draft guys like Josh Jacobs above him because I see them in similar roles.
Yeah, I mean, I actually like 22 is where I'm looking at on my spreadsheet right now, right behind Darrell Henderson, right ahead of Miles Sanders. For me, where it's like he obviously was already going to have a role. He's going to have an even bigger role now, but I don't think it all goes to him. There's going to be a second guy, whether or not it's the preseason darling. Is it Tyson Williams? Tyson Williams, whether it's Justice Hill, whether or not, I mean, they could still bring a guy in. But I guess what I will say, there are other people who know way more about Tyson Williams than me, to be clear. But just based on what I've heard other smarter people say, it doesn't sound like he's that different of a player from Gus Edwards. Like, he's kind of a power guy. So I think they need somebody else who can, like, because they run a lot of outside stuff that, like, that type of, like, Gus Edwards just can't get around the edge and make those kinds of runs that Dobbins could, obviously, and then maybe even like a Justice Hill. His skill set is at least more equipped for that part of the offense. Whether or not it's Hill, whether or not they go sign for someone, trade a very late round pick, I think there's going to be somebody else in the picture, and I'm not 100% sold. It's just Tyson Williams, excuse me, and maybe it could be three guys, and that is just when it turns into a quagmire, fantasy wise.
Yeah, well, from a team perspective, it's pretty interesting because this team is pretty bereft of skill or playmakers outside of Lamar Jackson. I mean, there's Mark Andrews, but Rashad Bateman and another receiver are starting on IR, so that's 3 games they're both missing. Hollywood Brown is still questionable with the hamstring injury. Tyler Wallace is questionable with an ankle injury. I mean, the Ravens are going to put it together because they have a good coaching staff and a good quarterback. But that team, from a fantasy perspective, looks really painful to evaluate now. They've lost so much in this preseason.
Dobbins, to me, even if you're including Mark Andrews as skill position, which, I mean, he's basically a receiver, but he plays tight end. I still think Dobbins was their best skill position player on the team. So obviously a big loss, and I think Edwards is a nice RB2. I would be cautious reaching too much higher on Gus than that. And another big bummer here, Irv Smith Jr., one of my guys, a guy that I know that Dalton really liked as well. I think he was a breakout for you, Dalton, in an earlier list this offseason. Had meniscus surgery. It was unclear until earlier today, on Wednesday, actually, what kind of surgery. He had it repaired. So he's out 4 to 5 months, and that means the season. So I guess first, your reaction to the Irv Smith injury, the news, and then we can get into what I know you're actually wanting to talk about here in Chris Herndon.
Well, from an everything perspective, I am now way more worried about the way this Vikings offense operates. I saw some people on Twitter talking about the really good possibility that Adam Thielen can repeat his TDs from last year because of the Irv Smith injury. I just still question if a 30-year-old wide receiver like Thielen can do that. I mean, and as a whole, if anybody's really going to benefit from this, I think it's Justin Jefferson. He's just going to get fed more. I talked about it a couple of pods ago, but he's due positive regression for touchdowns from last season. He was under what you would expect for a guy with his receiving yards and targets to get when it comes to touchdown totals, and he's just skilled enough to do it. So he's probably the biggest benefactor of this, in my opinion. Kirk Cousins definitely takes a major hit, and Dalvin Cook probably gets some more red zone carries, and they're probably going to go Mike Zimmer as hard as they can and go away from the pass game as much as possible.
Yeah, so I'm with you here that I'm not looking at either tight end as a benefactor. I'm looking at those receivers. Jefferson as the big one. I do think Thielen, at least for me, like For me personally, I have Thielen closer to 30 than 20. So there's definitely room for me to move him up that like others might not necessarily have. So Thielen would bump up a couple spots for me, I think. And Jefferson, I don't know. I don't know if he moves up maybe one spot. Like there's a lot less room for him to move up. But
well, what I will say that's interesting is Jefferson's fallen in drafts because of that shoulder injury to the third round in redraft. A lot of people are getting him with that turn, and I think he's definitely a value above that, especially with this injury.
Yeah, and then just on Irv Smith himself, since we are making this a little bit more dynasty centric today with other topics, I will say, even though, trust me, as someone who has Irv Smith in dynasty, it's a major bummer for this year, but you would rather long term he have it repaired than have it trimmed and be out a month and then be back. I mean, it's not something that happens every time. There are guys who I think that they've got it trimmed and it ends up being fine as their careers go on. But like Dwayne Wade, different sport I know, but Dwayne Wade like basically blames all of his knee problems, which if you follow basketball, there were a lot when he was with the Heat, not even like super late in his career, like when LeBron was there. He basically had bone on bone, and that's because he had that type of meniscus surgery that is really discouraged now. So this year, obviously major bummer. Long term, I think you've got to be a little bit relieved that they went the repair instead of trim route, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's better for a dynasty perspective. Obviously, I saw Josh Norris at Underdog has a 35% draft rate of Irv Smith in his best balls. So that's definitely something that's going to hurt.
Yes.
And I mean, the guy was just primed for a breakout season in the spiked weeks you want. So that's definitely tough. The Vikings ran the third most 12 personnel. And I do question what kind of offense they run because, I mean, their third wide receiver is Amir Smith-Marset, is a rookie. So it's just going to be hard for them to really run anything else. I guess Chris Herndon gets a bump, but if it's a redraft league, I'm not drafting.
I mean, are we sure Herndon's even the starter? Is it Tyler Conklin? Is it neither? Are they just kind of by committee? That'd be my guess. Is just kind of both guys just kind of exist and catch touchdowns every now and then, and you can't count on either one of them for any kind of. You can't ever start any of them, and if you do and they score, you just got lucky. It's not because there was anything predictive. That is what I think is going to happen with that situation.
Well, I do think you just described the tight end position in fantasy, actually.
Well, yes, but especially like in this case, there are better. Like I would rather just let me look over at my ranks here. There are still so like Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. I'd rather be playing Russian roulette and starting one of those guys every week than these Vikings guys. Like Blake Jarwin in Dallas, I think I'd even rather be starting him and hoping for the best in Dallas this year. Obviously, like Gronk, Evan Ingram, if he's healthy at some point again this season, Gerald Everett. Like I don't. These guys are all between like 15 and 20 for me, and are pretty comfortably ahead of these Vikings guys.
Yeah, me too. It's probably going to be a stream situation where they're playing a bad tight end defense that you want to really consider rostering them as a starting.
Mm-hmm. So Cam Newton in a little bit of a surprise move. I think it at least caught all of us by surprise. Maybe it shouldn't have because it's Bill Belichick, but is cut by the Patriots. And Mac Jones, it clears the way for Mac Jones to be the starter. He had looked pretty good in preseason. Now, preseason is preseason. We'll see what he looks like when the real season comes around. But Dalton, is there any fantasy impact for you here besides just, obviously like we weren't starting Cam. We weren't even streaming Cam. But if Cam played well for 2 or 3 weeks and had some rushing touchdowns, he would have eventually worked himself into that conversation. Is that the only impact, or are there other guys who you think are helped or hurt by this?
Well, fantasy Twitter had a heyday with this and thought that every single skill position player for the Patriots suddenly is a must draft. I'm still pretty questionable on it. I mean, N'Keal Harry's on the IR, and that wide receiver room is still disgusting. It's Nelson Aguilar, and then Jacoby Myers is now the darling that everybody wants to draft. I know Damian Harris is getting a lot of hype now, and as a 9th round pick, he was pretty valuable. Now that we know Mac is going to be there and Cam can't steal the touchdowns, but I've seen people ranking him ahead of guys like Josh Jacobs, and they're the same. They're getting the same treatment, except I would argue there's a better pass catcher in New England, and that Josh Jacobs is more talented than Damian Harris.
Yeah, and Jacobs had like he's not the best pass catcher and hasn't done it the most, but like Damian Harris, like what he was it literally like one pass last year? It was literally one reception last year.
Yeah, and I think there's been an over adjustment on their entire skill position core, that everybody thinks that Mac Jones is suddenly going to lead them to the promised land, and we're forgetting it's a rookie quarterback. I mean,
Yeah.
these players should be treated like we're treating the Jets players, and all of those players are borderline like 12th round picks still, except for maybe Michael Carter earlier in the season. And we should still be treating the Patriots that way, in my opinion. They're not going to be an offense that puts up points. They're going to be an offense that dink and dunks and relies on their defense all season, and that's just the way they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I think you can maybe make the argument, especially given you lose Irv Smith at tight end, and now you've got Evan Ingram banged up. You can make the argument that maybe these Patriots guys are a little bit more desirable now. I think John Irv Smith would be the top one, but not much. And I'm with you. Like if you could predict that every rushing attempt and every rushing touchdown that Cam had goes to Damian Harris, like yeah, sure, great. But, like, guess what? They might throw the ball more down there. Ramondre Stevenson might rush for 6 touchdowns this year. Like, James White, he can run for touchdowns, too. That's not his role. But, like, if they're in the 2-minute drill or they're just kind of run, hurry up, and he's the guy in there, like, he has rushed for plenty of touchdowns in his career. Like, I don't think this should be a boon to anybody in New England, but that is not the vibe I've got just being on Twitter the last couple of days. I agree with you.
Yeah, and are we still sure Mac's going to be good? I mean,
right? Like, yeah, he was like, it was like, oh, like they took Mac, and I know part of it was because everyone thought he was going at third, so he already had like that stench of bust to him because we knew that was a reach. So I think that's maybe part of why the perception is there for Mac, but still, yeah, it's not like he was anyone's favorite quarterback prospect.
Yeah, and it's just I'm still really questionable on Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick as play callers without Tom Brady, in all honesty. And this is going to prove a lot this season whether or not they can, but I'm not willing to hedge those bets, especially because the last year we saw Brady there, that offense was pretty inept with a quarterback who we now know still has what it takes. And he only didn't have what it takes because they had inept play calling and poor playmakers. And it looks like New England's going to have that again this year.
Mm-hmm. So T.Y. Hilton, he is going to miss the start of the season. He has a disc issue. Just always seems like it's something with T.Y. Hilton, except this time it was in late August, early September instead of mid-October. That's the only thing really different here. I think he's out at least the first 3 weeks. It sounds like he'll probably be back week 4, week 5, somewhere in there. Does this really change how you look at? I think Michael Pittman would be about the only guy, or is this just too short of a time to really do anything substantial to Pittman's value?
I mean, I still just hate this passing attack in general, and if anything,
the Colts just seem cursed right now too. Quite frankly, they're like they're kind of the Chargers of 2021, but the Chargers have been a lot of years.
Yeah. Well, and if anything, I mean, last year this team ran so many 12 tight end sets and mixed out their 3 tight ends. They probably do that again. They have a rookie whose name I can't remember that got some pretty good preseason hype at the tight end position. Granson? Yeah. Kylan Granson.
Well, and they have Mo Alley Cox, who might be the biggest tight end I've ever seen.
Yeah. So they're probably going to run more 12 tight end sets, probably going to really try to rely on their defense and control the ball and run the ball like they did towards the end of last season. And in general, I mean, maybe Michael Pittman fits the prototypical alpha. He's gotten a lot of really good looks on Twitter, but it's still the Colts and it's still Carson Wentz, and I still have questions about it. I mean, they just need weapons and they don't really have them, so this hurts their players more than anything else.
Yep, and the guy who was supposed to be the starting left tackle is done for the year already. He was supposed to be the guy who was filling in for Eric Fisher until Eric Fisher got back, and also Eric Fisher has COVID, so that is delaying his comeback as well. So yeah, Carson Wentz behind a third string left tackle isn't exactly bringing me great optimism for Michael Pittman either.
Yeah, last time Carson Wentz started behind a bad offensive line, he got benched for Jalen Hurts. So
Michael Thomas, I don't think we really have to have too much of a takeaway here, but just worth noting, he is starting the season on the PUP. That became official as of a couple of days ago. Not really anything actionable here, in my opinion, but just I think we probably need to add to Michael Thomas's risk profile that he just doesn't ever play this year, because there's just a lot happening in New Orleans when it pertains to Michael Thomas.
Well, and I'm not trying to be really doom and gloom, but I saw this take on Twitter that I didn't think about. The Saints open up their season. They don't play at home for 8 games because of the hurricane situation. players on the PUP typically don't travel with the team. And we know Michael Thomas spent an entire offseason not talking to the team. It's just not good for the way this guy's been to not be around that team and to have, 6 weeks maybe to just sit there and mourn and be upset. And then he has to show up to practice by himself to do his physical rehab. There's just some questions I have there as to whether or not Michael Thomas is going to have a further disconnect too. I think he's a big risk profile.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. And obviously the upside is you get a top 5 guy when he comes back. The downside is you should have just drafted Marquez Callaway or somebody else in that receiving core. I would say that receiving core
is the worst in the NFL.
Is the worst in the NFL, or it's right up there with the Lions. Like those two are really neck and neck right now.
I forget the Lions are an NFL team sometimes.
Oh, well, you will not forget it for long because we've got Dynasty talk, and believe it or not, my first guy is a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, a guy that I am keeping my eye on at least this season. This is probably like the least exciting of the 3 guys, but Quintez Cephas could still like eventually work himself into your wide receiver like 4 on your dynasty team, be a fill-in guy. If he has a good, he could be that this year and could work himself into that role in Detroit where he is that for at least a couple years for your team. He produced a little bit last year, despite obviously Kenny Galladay was there for parts, and then Marvin Jones there for parts as well. And it's funny when you look at his game, he had 350 yards, 2 touchdowns. The most targets he had was week 1, 10 targets, which I thought was like really weird because Kenny Galladay played that game, right? Like he wasn't already injured and missing time then, so a little strange. But anyway, Football Outsiders did 25 guys most likely to level up in 2021. Cephas was actually 11th on that list, which like I think they're more excited about him than even I am. And even like our Dynasty League, for example, he got picked up off waivers today. So he had been out there. He's wide receiver 99 in Dynasty on Fantasy Pros right now. So again, not
a triple digit,
not triple digit, but not even a guy on the radar really at that point either. But somebody is going to have value in that passing game this year. Who it is and how good that value is, very, very much up in the air. But Cephas is a guy who he's got good size, good strength, good ball skills, not a speedster. And I think Amon St. Brown is like the top guy you want dynasty-wise on that team in that receiver room. But if you're taking a flyer, you're looking for someone who is like literally dirt cheap. I think Cephas is a guy that could see a lot of targets this year, and who knows where that takes him in the next couple of years on this team or elsewhere.
Yeah, and really part of his dynasty profile will probably be dependent on if the Lions, they probably will get a top 5 pick and then pick a quarterback in this upcoming draft.
Yep.
And if he can get connected to somebody who's going to increase his value, because we've seen Jared Goff took a lot of productive coaching to get him to where he was in the NFL. Yes. And I don't think he's going to have that same coaching anymore. But there's certainly a huge talent disparity in this wide receiver room, and whoever can come out on top is likely going to have some productive role, whether that's they cut Perriman even, didn't they?
Yeah, they cut Perriman, and like they have Tyrell Williams, but he's injury prone. He's not exactly young. He's not great at anything but running deep. So like he could be more valuable this year, but if you're talking long term, yeah, I mean it's St. Brown and it's Quintez Cephas. Those are the 2 guys, and Cephas is the one that is free. So I'm interested in him.
So my first guy going down the same path on a team we just talked about actually is Michael. I think it's Strachan. I don't know how to say it, to be honest with you, but he's a wide receiver for the Colts. If you watched the preseason, like some of us have a problem with, he was pretty interesting to watch. He plays really big, and he's really big. He's 6'4", 250. Guy plays like a tight end, but he fights for the ball. His spark athlete comparison is directly to Alshon Jeffrey. And like I was talking about earlier, this wide receiver room in Indianapolis is not the best. And I mean, an Alshon Jeffrey player comp's not great. I mean, it's not like Alshon Jeffrey is a premier wide receiver. But again, we're going with deep dynasty profiles. I still am more questionable with Michael Pittman than other people. And if somebody can latch on to that contested catch role that Carson Wentz looks for, I think Michael Strachan is really the guy to go for it. He was a productive receiver in college. He fell in this draft mostly because this draft was it was just full of wide receiver weapons. I mean, when
Mhm.
guys like Rondell Moore are going in the second round, this guy's going to fall up to the fourth round overall.
Mhm.
And I mean, Frank Reich talked glowingly about him. He said that this was one of the players they didn't even consider when it came to roster cutdowns. And I'm pretty excited if this team can get a good quarterback, because I don't think it's Carson Wentz.
Sure.
Going forward,
Mhm.
they have a great offensive line and they have a good offensive-minded coach. So you have
Yep.
what you need.
Yep, I was going to say good coach there in Frank Reich. And then you mentioned that you look at those receivers. You've got T.Y. Hilton, who is out the door very soon, I would imagine. Pittman is the one, no question. Pittman is the one there going forward. They're going to have a revolving door at tight end, it looks like. And like Paris Campbell was exciting for like the couple games before he got hurt last year, but now
One game.
yeah, whatever it was, 1 game, 2 games. I think it may have been 2. We'll give him 2.
Well, he played 1 snap in the second game. If we want to give it to him,
I just remember I added him on waivers, and it was really sad when he got hurt immediately after that. But he's a speedster who has now had 2 lower extremity injuries in the NFL, so not entirely sure how he's going to be coming back and what his long-term profile is as a player, because it's not like he had a great career, obviously, before that either. So, yeah, I think it's a decent call and definitely an interesting one. We can move to the chat for here just a second. Stevie Bear, I'm pretty sure Stephen Fowler in the chat actually has a question about Kyle Pitts. I'm not Kyler Murray. Kyle Pitts says, I know the Kyle Pitts hype train is nuts, but what do y'all think his production is going to be this season? Dalton, where do you have Kyle Pitts in your tight end rankings as of right now?
I was my tight end 6, so it's right below TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews. Again, and I think I've voiced this before, my concern with drafting tight ends in the middle rounds is it's really hard to return the value because they have to pretty much contribute the same way a George Kittle, Darren Waller, Travis Kelce would when you're giving up receivers like Deontay Johnson and Tyler Lockett, who are almost a lock for 1,000-yard, really productive season. My big concern is if you watch any of the preseason, Kyler Pitts, first of all, has a 27 yards per catch with like 6 catches. He was doing really well, and it's very limited. But then Arthur Smith didn't even bother putting Kyle Pitts in as a tight end. He was playing wide receiver the entire time. So that did kind of factor into my decision making. If you're going to take a home run shot in the mid rounds on a tight end, I now think my previous bust would be Kyle Pitts, because I think Arthur Smith might just run him as a wide receiver. And if that's the case, the guy is a huge value, and he's just built like wide receiver. That's how he played at Florida.
Yeah, I will say, Dalton, you're wrong. He only had 1 target for 27 yards. He did not have 6.
There we go, 27 yards per catch.
That's kind of good. I'm just saying.
So I've got him at tight end 4, just ahead of Andrews and Hawkinson. I think it's really close between all 3 of those guys. The difference for me, just rankings wise, is if you're looking at range of outcomes, I think there's a higher chance that Pitts is just like generational and like a top 2, top 3 type of guy in his rookie year. And Andrews and Hawkinson, I don't see as good of a chance of them being like top 3 type of guys. But yeah, I'm with you that if you're talking about drafting, Steven, I would still lean receiver. There's a lot of good ones in that range, but if he's already on your team and you're just thinking to yourself, okay, how good is this guy going to be this year? Like, I think he's going to be pretty good. I ranked him with the hope, at least, that what Dalton was saying was going to be true, that he is pretty much a receiver who doesn't play tight end very much. They have Hayden Hurst, who can do a lot of that tight end dirty work still there. And, maybe Pitts does a little bit of that, but he should be looked at, or I hope he can be looked at as more of a receiver, a rookie receiver than a rookie tight end. And if that's the case, yeah, I think he actually might have a shot to live up to that mid-round value, and I think he's going to have a pretty monster season.
Especially if they have to throw a lot, which I think they might, considering that defense is really suspect.
And we will see. Maybe Arthur Smith can actually get Matt Ryan to score some red zone touchdowns this season. Would be a very nice touch to the Atlanta Falcons offense. And speaking of rookie tight ends, good transition here. My next guy to watch is a guy on my roster, actually, so I'm definitely going to be watching, is Pat Freiermuth. So he's tight end. Explain this one to me. tight end 19 in redraft, tight end 20 in Dynasty. How is he lower in Dynasty than he is in redraft?
Well, that's a great question, Evan, and I don't have a clear answer for you.
Okay, so just back to Steven while I'm looking at it. He had the 6th pick in a 16-man league, was going to take Kelsey, but the guy picked him 5th. Steven got screwed. He took Pitts in the 4th round, so basically like in a standard 12 team, that's very late 4th, almost the 5th. I think we'd say taking Pitts at the 4-5 is probably pretty good value. Don't you think, Dalton?
Yeah, well, in a 16-man league, that's even farther back. That's closer to the 6th round, isn't it?
I'm saying like in the 4th round of a 16 team, if that were a 12 team league, like that pick would be at the 4-5 turn ish.
Yeah, I would also say in a 16-man league, the streaming tight end strategy that you and I employ probably a lot tougher. And Pitts probably has a way more definite like weekly floor of like 7 points compared to some guys you might be stuck streaming like, I don't know. We talked about him earlier, but like a Tyler Conklin might be what you have on waivers. So you're definitely in a better position having somebody with a lead upside. So I think it's definite value there, getting him like that.
Yeah, a 16-team league definitely helps that in my opinion because, yeah, like you said, the streaming, especially even if everyone just has one tight end, like it's pretty rough. But there's going to be multiple people who have 2 tight ends in that league because that's just how it goes. So, yeah, I think in a 16-team league, I would – in a 10-team league and a 16-team league, I'm more likely to lean tight end than I am in like a standard 12-man league, I think.
Yep, I would agree with that. It just changes the value, especially, with that many people. I mean, you have 32 tight ends rostered, so you want to have somebody who you can rely on.
So back to Freiermuth, tight end 19 in redraft, 20 in Dynasty. Don't get that one at all. It's possible that this call could pay off this season a little bit. Like he caught a couple touchdown passes. Big Ben has like actually said before, like in the past, he likes having the big-bodied receivers in the red zone. I think that's part of the Chase Claypool appeal to Pittsburgh when they drafted him, was a big-bodied guy. So it's possible, Freiermuth could be a touchdown guy this year. But there was just no shot they were cutting Ebron this year. It would have been almost a $7.5 million cap hit. But this is the last year of his contract, and they could bring him back for cheap. But it's very possible you invest a second-round pick in a tight end. It's very possible he is the tight end in this offense next season. And again, this year, I really wouldn't bet on him having too much of an impact unless he wins that job. He's a rookie tight end, and although he is a receiving tight end, he's more of like in the Hunter Henry role than like a blocking tight end role, I think, is his profile coming out of college. But the Steelers aren't going to play very much 12 personnel, only 11% or 12% of snaps last year. They've got 3 great receivers. You might as well get all 3 of those guys out on the field. But he could be the guy ahead of Ebron this year, and next year he could be, as good as the 3rd option if Juju is gone, along with Ebron, and maybe 4th if you've got Najee Harris catching a lot of passes too. He's got good route running skills. He lined up everywhere at Penn State at tight end, on the perimeter and the slot. 6'5", 250. He's just an interesting flyer for me in fantasy, in Dynasty.
Yeah, well, I think in Dynasty especially is interesting. We know, at least I know, I think Juju's gone next season, which opens up that receiving opportunity. In addition, Eric Ebron's probably gone after this year, and we know what Eric Ebron is as a tight end now. He's a player without real good hands. I know Freiermuth's kind of big knock coming into the draft was his ability to block, and Eric Ebron can do that. So it really does help that Freiermuth can probably just develop as a receiving prospect. I mean, the guy, what is he, 250 pounds or so?
Yep.
He's
huge. He's 6'5", 250.
Yeah, so he's the kind of player you want on your tight end roster, is a guy who can go up and kind of moss players and really get those catches. If he's bad at blocking, I'm fine with that in a dynasty perspective because I don't want my tight ends blocking, or at least as little as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you don't mind them being good at blocking because it gets them on the field. They can play in more situations. But if this is a guy that is just going to be a receiving tight end, that's obviously just fine too. But yeah, Dalton, who's your second guy on your list?
Mine's actually tight end too,
okay.
Except he's not a rookie. It's Dan Arnold, who spent his last year at the Arizona Cardinals, and he is now with the Carolina Panthers.
Mhm.
So last year was his best year, which wasn't great by any means. He had 4 touchdowns.
I was going to say, last year he was pretty seldom used because Cliff Kingsbury does not really use tight ends.
Exactly. And that's why I have hope, because 4 touchdowns and 438 yards in an offense that doesn't utilize the tight end is exciting. He is known, just like I was talking about with Pat Freiermuth, this guy's only known as a receiving player. I read a little article from the Charlotte Observer, just kind of figuring out if I wanted to list him or not. Dan Arnold was 6'4", 220. He's bulked up to 6'4", 240.
I thought you were going to say, I thought you were going to like tell me he grew like an inch or two or something.
Thankfully. And also, he apparently has a history with Joe Judge. He was coached by Joe Judge in college. So this is another guy that Joe Judge brought in. But really the reason he's on this list and I'm watching him is because last year and the year before, Sam Darnold had the 3rd highest tight end target rate of any quarterback in the NFL. Part of the reason I was so in on Chris Herndon last year. And if that carries over to a better Sam Darnold, which a lot of people are anticipating, and an offense that runs at a higher pace, then there's a lot more value in Arnold. Darnold to Arnold, it's going to be hard. But there's a lot of value in Arnold because you want a team that runs quickly. And with most tight ends that you're getting deep and late, you just want them to have that touchdown upside. The question and the thing I'll watch the first couple weeks is whether or not Terrace Marshall has this big red zone role that a lot of people are predicting, because we know Robbie Anderson isn't a red zone guy. I think DJ Moore is a better red zone guy than him. But if Arnold becomes the 2 or the 3 red zone threat, I like him in Dynasty if he stays there. He's only 26, so he has good years, and we know it takes a while to learn the tight end role in the NFL.
Yeah, I was going to say he actually is a little bit of an older guy, but yeah, he's still got at least a couple of good years left if he can be that guy. The concern would just be, can he get involved enough? Because, unlike Freiermuth, he does have the receivers in front of him, like Freiermuth. Najee Harris could be that guy, but he's not that guy yet. Like Christian McCaffrey is the ultimate volume guy right now, should be for the next couple of years, barring injury. So there might just be a little bit less to go around, but yeah, we'll see. It's an interesting call. It's just pretty much with him going to come down to, can he get more involved? Because he was like a sleeper guy for redraft last year, I think. And then it was like he just wasn't getting the volume. Everyone had hope because there was really nobody outside of Hopkins, and we all searched for somebody outside of Hopkins we could trust, and just turns out there was just nobody outside of Hopkins we could trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Cliff Kingsbury, I don't think knows how to run an offense, but that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah.
So who's your third guy, Evan?
So my third guy had to go with a little homer pick here. Mr. KU football alum himself, Khalil Herbert. Now, obviously, he's not a only KU football alum. Went to Virginia Tech for one last season.
But for his best season, some would say.
Well, it was definitely his best season. He was a legit Heisman Trophy candidate his last year there. Almost 1,200 yards rushing, almost 8 yards an attempt. Yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good. His first time playing behind a real offensive line. It was pretty good. Number one, just want to throw this out there. Not that I'm saying he's that Dalvin Cook. Not that I'm saying he's the same level of prospect. I do just want to just point out that Matt Waldman has pointed out that Khalil Herbert kind of has that same profile to a lesser extent of a Dalvin Cook, where he doesn't test well, like doesn't do well in the 3-cone, not a great 40 time, maybe fell in the draft a little bit because of all that stuff like Dalvin Cook. Everyone was convinced that Dalvin Cook wasn't going to be a great running back because his 3-cone sucked. His 40 was like whatever, like a 4.55, whatever it was, right? But he's got that one move and explode. And that's kind of what Herbert does, again, to a way lesser extent than Dalvin Cook, to be clear. But I think he's a better player than his draft pedigree would indicate, is where I'm going here. We watched him for 3 years here at KU. He never averaged fewer than 4 yards a carry here, which I'd say is an accomplishment considering, again, the O-line he was playing behind and just the offense as a whole. His first coach, David Beatty, having no idea how to use him, and he obviously only had 4 games with Les Miles, and not that was that much better either. But I already mentioned it. He had a ton of yards, 1,200 on almost 8 a carry at Virginia Tech in a shortened season. I like Herbert a lot as a player. Think he was held back situationally at KU Part of that was because Puka was here and they had the split duties, and part of it just that situation. He wasn't that much of a pass catcher in college. Don't know if that's because he can't do it or just wasn't in the situation to do it. I know at KU, Puka was the superior pass catcher of the two. Don't really know at Virginia Tech what the case was. I think he can be a threat to Damian Williams this year. And obviously in the future, Damian's not long for Chicago. He's probably not long for being in the NFL. He's probably got 1 or 2 years left, I would say at the most. Tariq Cohen's out for the first 6 weeks. Damian Williams will probably play, but that's a little bit of an opening for Khalil Herbert to maybe earn his way onto the field and make an impression. Now, I'm not saying it's going to have value this year, but that could just be something that goes a long way in helping his value going forward. He can maybe earn some equity, earn some trust on that team. In 2 years, are we sure the Bears are going to pay David Montgomery? And if they don't, could Khalil Herbert be maybe not the starter? Maybe he is. Maybe he's the starter, or maybe he's the 40% to someone else's 60%. I think you could have a guy who could be a valuable back in 2-3 years in Dynasty, even if Montgomery is there, but especially if he's not.
Yeah, I like Khalil Herbert a lot as well, and I think Montgomery's not long for Chicago. My concern, I think he has a clear pathway to a workload in Chicago. My concern is that a lot of the time these ancillary roster guys are in danger of losing their jobs when new coaches come in, and I do not think Matt Nagy is long for the Chicago coaching job, and I don't think the Chicago front office is long for the Chicago coaching job.
It's possible.
And that would be one of my concerns. Obviously, these guys are so deep that you're rostering them on like a lot of moonshots. But Khalil,
and to be clear, just to clarify, yeah, I said the coaching staff, but also just to any coaching staff who may be watching, right? Like if he plays well, other coaches will at least take notice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a clear path to playing. It would be helpful if he had a receiving pedigree we know of, because that seems like a bigger opening in this offense. But also at the same time, this offense could very quickly just crater with Andy Dalton, and they might start looking at guys who they want to see if they have something in them. And he's one of those guys who could very well benefit from that.
Yeah, if they're, just spit out a record. If they're 3-9, 4-9, whatever, 13 games in, do you think they're going to give Damian Williams his 5 or 7 touches a game? Or do you think maybe Khalil Herbert might get at least a little bit of a shot? I don't know. I just think this is probably me being a homer because I watched him a ton at KU, but I think this guy's a better running back than his pedigree. I think he had a coach that had no idea how good he was his first couple of years in college and just wasn't the best tester in the draft combine. I think this could be a steal dynasty-wise going forward. Yeah,
well, the other thing, he did beat out Ryan Nall, which I know you're like, Ryan Nall, that's a big whoop. But he is a guy who we touted a little bit last year in the fantasy community, even because he had that every down skill set. And you would question the coaching staff's acumen. I know I just spoke bad of them, but if they're keeping Khalil Herbert and they only have Damian Williams would be the only quote unquote pass catcher on the team, we know Montgomery doesn't really do that well.
I mean, they have Cohen, but he's banged up, obviously.
Exactly. Well, he's on the PUP to start the season, so you won't see him for 3 games. So maybe they think Herbert even has that, and he might get some looks early on with that, which would be helpful. And then to be a guy tied with Justin Fields going forward would always be good.
Yep, absolutely.
So my last guy, just like yours, is another running back. I chose Elijah Mitchell for the San Francisco 49ers out of the Raging Cajuns in Louisiana. So they took 2 running backs in this draft. And the thing is, first and foremost, it's just nice to hold a 49ers running back on the team.
Is it, or is it stressful?
Well, let me rephrase. It's nice to hold one of the guys that you don't have to worry about getting injured or not playing, because the only time that this guy's going to play is when other people are already injured.
I'll clarify that even better for you. It's nice to have a 49ers running back on your team when it's one of your bench players, not when it's one of your starters.
Exactly. And we all know Raheem Mostert next year is going to be on the wrong side of 30. He's probably not going to last another season. We know Trey Sermon's going to be the dog in this offense going forward, but we also know Kyle Shanahan is not just going to utilize one back. Now, Wayne Gallman was beat out by Elijah Mitchell on this roster. Elijah Mitchell didn't play 2 preseason games as a 6th-round pick rookie, played 1 game, and still beat out Wayne Gallman, who's an NFL vet by all standards.
And Wayne Gallman does stink, though.
Yeah, but still, 6th-round pick, it's even making the roster we saw with these cuts is tough for some guys.
Yep, and that's the same thing with Herbert, too. Yep, exactly.
Yep. And we saw he stood up a Raiders player, a Raiders linebacker in the hole in his game. It was incredible. This guy has the skills. The Raging Cajuns, he was 5th in the NFL not in the NFL, the NCAA in rushing yards. He had a ton of touchdowns, and he was the bowl champion as well. He was their best player when they played in a bowl game. He is extremely electric. Part of the reason he fell in the draft, he's a small school guy. And after Trey Sermon next season, you're going to have JaMychal Hasty, who's another quality back, and then you might have Jeffrey Wilson if they bring him back, depending on how he comes back from his knee injury. So there's a clear path coming forward for a young guy to eventually make his way into a starting role on this roster, because there's always going to be 2 backs on this team at least.
He's going to be in the rotation at some point if he's on the team long enough. That's just how it goes with their running backs.
Yep, and then you trade him. The moment he does well, you trade him, because that's what you do with anybody who's not the quote-unquote lead back in this offense.
Yeah, and he could even, just as soon as this year, he could easily pass up JaMychal Hasty, because as much as I like Hasty or liked him last year, it was kind of a little bit of a joke, a little exaggerated, but I do like Hasty. But he does have a fumbling problem. If you have a lot of running backs, pretty easy to get yourself the doghouse if that is one of your problems.
And if there's one thing we know about this coaching staff is the minute you hit the doghouse, you don't see the field anymore. If anybody remembers Dante Pettis, he was on the wrong side of Kyle Shanahan's bad side, and he did not make the roster last year because of it.
Yeah, he went from being like a guy people were taking like in the 5th or 6th round to like, does he play on a team right now?
I don't believe so.
I don't think he plays on a team right now. So yeah, I like the call. I like that we both went with kind of long shot running backs, because again, that is probably the most valuable thing that you're scouring your dynasty league for, is you're hoping to have that guy, that running back that you're grooming, that's on your taxi squad for a year, that you can call up and you can look like a genius when in 3 years that guy gets you 12 points in a week 4 matchup. I'm sure it's gotta be exhilarating.
Yeah. Guys I want to put here, just 2 honorable mentions. They've shot up too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Ramondre Stevenson was a guy that Matt Waldman kind of keyed me in on that I really liked, but now I think he's even being taken as kind of a handcuffed Damian Harris, so he's not a deeper find. And then Josh Palmer is another guy who I've talked a lot about, but he's going in the last round of some drafts now too. So I don't think those are 2 guys, though, that if for some reason they're on your dynasty waiver wire, they're rookies, please pick them up.
Yep. I agree with you there. Let's bring Johnny back in here, and we are going to get to some real life football here, and we're going to talk gambling, a favorite subject of all 3 of ours. We've got some team over-unders that each of us, like I said at the beginning, we've each brought 3 lines, and I cheated and have a couple more in case you guys don't talk about them. We've each brought 3 of our favorite lines to bet on, and Johnny, I'm going to start with you. What is the first over-under that you're taking the bait on?
Well, this one I've already placed on, and it is the Texans under 4 wins.
Okay, see, that was in my notes, but I was like, I cannot imagine that one of the 2 of Johnny and Dalton do not have the Texans as an under.
Full disclosure, I had this one, and I'll swap it because I have one I was willing to put it instead of it.
I felt like it was such like a cherry pick one, but I felt we just had to say it. And also I put money on it, so I felt like just to have it out there.
Now let me throw this at you, Johnny. On FanDuel, you can get a parlay, Texans and Lions under 4.5 wins at plus 250.
Both of them went under 4.5 games.
If they both went under 4.5 games, that's plus 250.
Are we talking
parlay?
Are we talking combined or are we talking separate?
No,
separate.
Both.
Okay. If they both go 4 and 13,
You're really ruining our rep if people like we think we know gambling and you don't know what a parlay is over here.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know because sometimes FanDuel does like these unique things you can gamble on.
Evan explained it out pretty well.
I just wanted to be sure.
Yes. So if they both go 4-13, then you win whatever money you put down. And I gotta say that one's pretty interesting. At plus 250.
I'm intrigued, and I'm not on the app right now.
You can double check me, but I'm pretty sure I saw that listed under the parlays and was like, okay, gonna make a note of that one for later. Anything obvious or not obvious, Johnny, with the Texans that you want to talk about, or can we just leave it at they're bad? Tyrod Taylor's their quarterback. Yeah,
it shouldn't be an organization, like, the whole spiel. Their team name is quite awful as well, but. You don't have to go down that road.
They're the worst team in the NFL, and they have a 52-man roster because Deshaun Watson's going to be a non-active participant every week. I mean,
I just can't believe he's put down on the depth chart as other.
Yeah, there's no second string quarterback listed on the. It goes first, then third string, and then Deshaun Watson other.
If there was an expansion draft, would the expansion team just skip the Texans as picking a player off their roster?
Stevie Bear wants to know if we've got the VPN running. No, we've got Johnny who lives in a state where it's legal to gamble, my friend.
Oh, FanDuel is legal in Colorado.
No, okay. I wasn't gonna give away your state if you didn't want to, but there you have it.
This 50 of them, it's not hard to figure out.
You're right. At 1 out of 50, they would have got there at some point. So my first team, I'm sticking in the state, coming in maybe a little hotter than the Texans, though. I'm going Cowboys under 9.5 wins. I think this line is a Cowboys special. Go ahead, Johnny.
On FanDuel, it's under 9.5, so I think that's even better.
I said 9. I said 9.5.
Oh, I thought you said 9. My bad. My bad.
All good. 9.5. 9.5. Still good though. Still taking the under. I think if you put this roster and this situation and what I mean by this situation, like the Dak uncertainty and all of that stuff, if you put that all on like the Indianapolis Colts, I don't think this line's 9.5. I think it's more like 8.5 or 8, maybe 9. I think they're going to be in that 7 to 9 win range, and I would be pretty surprised if it's too far over, even with the NFC East. We know the Dak injury concerns. He's got the shoulder he's been dealing with. He's supposed to play, but in week 1, but not exactly opening up in a easy environment at Tampa. That's probably a loss. And he's also coming off a catastrophic ankle injury, which we just kind of forget because he's dealing with the shoulder right now. But I'll be curious to see how he looks coming back in that regard too. And I just think the defense is going to have to take a major jump for them to hit this number. And I know they drafted some guys on that side. A lot of guys, actually, like all of the draft picks were on that side, but I just still don't see it. The offensive line should be better than last year, but it's not going to be like the same old Cowboys, like masher top 5 type of offensive line. I don't think. I think the questions about Zeke after last year are legitimate. He had just not a great season from a production standpoint. Fumbled the ball a lot of times, 2 fewer fumbles than touchdowns last year. If you're in a fantasy league, that's -1 point for fumbles not lost. He really hurt you. He really hurt you in that too. Shout out J-Law. If then you just look at their schedule, Tampa and KC on the road, like that's just 2 penciled in losses, automatic 2 losses. And then they get the Chargers, Patriots, Vikings, and Saints, although I don't remember when that Saints game is, whether it's going to be on the road still or not. But those are all like tough games on the road. I don't think they have an easy schedule. I think Washington is my pick in that division. And then you've got Mike McCarthy, 6-8 toward the over in his career. Not exactly my favorite coach. I'm taking the under here. I see a lot more ways that happens than the over.
Yeah, and I agree with you on this one. We're going to have a fun NFC East podcast right here, apparently, because we'll talk more about that division here in a minute. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it took a historic offensive production through the first 5-ish games, if you count before Dak's injury, for them to be 3-2 last season. And that was, Dak was on pace to break an NFL record. That included the miraculous Atlanta comeback. It was an incredible amount of work for them just to get to the record they were at before the Dak injury. And I've said it before, but I think linebackers are like the running backs of defenses. They just don't really change the way your team plays. And defensively, they don't have the weapons. Trayvon Diggs is still the cornerback one, and he got absolutely torched by Terry McLaurin. One of my favorite NFL moments was him talking trash to McLaurin, just showing him up.
Yep.
But they just don't have the defensive weapons they need. Other than DeMarcus Lawrence, I don't really know who they have that can be a playmaker on that defense.
Mhm.
And if they're going to be playing in shootouts, and we know Dak has had historically questionable decision-making, which is great for fantasy, but it's not great for real-life football.
Mhm.
And this offense is going to have a historic season to keep them afloat to a 10-win season.
Yeah, and that's what I think. I think, and I've been on record even before the Dak injury, I think this is more like a top 10 type of offense to me than top 5 in the NFL. Still very good, not quite what they're going to need to hit this threshold. And they were actually 2-3, not 3-2. I double checked that to make sure. I couldn't remember. With their 2 wins coming 40-39 against the Falcons, which was like, if you remember, that was the big win probability chart game where it was like the Falcons had like a 99.8% chance to win. They didn't win. And then 37-34 against the Giants when Dak actually got hurt in the third quarter. So they, not exactly 2 stellar wins to start that season either, even with all of that production. So Dalton, who's your first team here?
Staying with the team you just spoke about is the New York Giants,
okay,
with an under of 7 wins. Let me just say, I feel bad for the NFC East because they play the AFC West. That is they're matched up with this year. They also get to play the Rams, the Bucks, and the Chiefs. I mean, they play 3 perennial Super Bowl contenders. This is from Sharp Football I got while researching over-unders. The New York Giants have the 31st ranked offensive line by Sharp Football and play 4 of the 5 top 5 ranked defensive lines. I mean, it is going to be an absolute payday on Daniel Jones. They play the Broncos, they play the Chargers, they play the Bucks. All of those are very, very good defensive lines. And then they play the Rams with Aaron Donald. Daniel Jones has a pinch hit for not holding onto the ball, and their top weapon in the receiving game, Kenny Golladay, is already banged up. They are going to miss their tight end, who, for whatever it has to say, it looks like Evan Ingram's going to miss a couple of games. He led the team in targets last year, so there's something there. I just don't see a path for this team winning 7 games, let alone, I mean, I thought it would be close to like a 5 over-under.
Well, and you mentioned the offensive line and the schedule that they're playing against the defensive lines. Are those rankings projected for this year, or were those rankings from last year? Do you know?
Projected this year. Another line I forgot to mention was the absolute monstrosity in Washington with Chase Young that they get twice.
And what does Daniel Jones struggle with the most? It is fumbles and pocket awareness. Not a great combo to have that be your biggest weakness and be playing behind that offensive line against that schedule. And you've got Saquon, you've got Kenny Golladay, who are already having, or still in Saquon's case, and then already in Kenny Galladay's case, you just have the injury concerns there. Yeah, I've got to see the Giants win more than like 4 or 5 games in a season before I'm taking the over on 7. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I can't forget Jason Garrett's the offensive coordinator there. The most vanilla offense I've ever seen.
Johnny, who's your second team here?
All right, see, I'm glad I wrote down like 7 because my second team was the Dallas under 9.5. My third team was the Giants under 7.
Okay.
So the next one I have is the Falcons under 7.5.
See, I thought about that. I just Big Cat's rule, like never bet on the Falcons, and then he does and always loses. I think never bet on the Falcons. It's not like a great rule, but it's at least like it's a safe rule. Like they're just
very safe.
They're always going to hurt you somehow.
I'm ready to be hurt because whenever I placed a bet this morning on the under, Vegas had it at plus 115. So I'm like, what do they know? Like, do they really think they're gonna hit because the over is at minus 135, so they're the favorite for it to hit the over. So I'm ready to be hurt and lose money on it, but I think they just hit the under. I just have a feeling about it.
Well, their defense is not looking like it's going to be much better. I don't think they've got a couple nice players, but that secondary, I think they replaced every single safety that was on the roster last year. If I'm not mistaken, every safety that was on the active roster last year is gone. And if we remember that Falcons-Packers game from last year, you know why all of those safeties are gone. They were the worst pass defense in the league for a reason.
Well, and just to add to that, I wouldn't expect much talent to be there because if anybody paid close attention to the Julio Jones trade, the cap situation in Atlanta is so horribly bad. They are having trouble bringing in talent. So I wouldn't even expect them to be better with it. I mean, if you're betting the over on this, which I think I agree with Johnny on the under, you're hoping Arthur Smith has like a offensive renaissance with 38 years old? 38-year-old Matt Ryan, who's been bad without, or not bad, but not great without Julio Jones. And then an offensive skill weaponry that includes Mike Davis, Olamide Zacchaeus, and Russell Gage. I mean, it's not great.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty to be concerned about if you're a Falcons fan, and you're probably hoping that you're bad enough to draft a quarterback and have your Matt Ryan replacement, which I love Kyle Pitts, but I, as a Falcons fan, would have probably wanted to take a quarterback and be moving on with this era. But it is what it is. My second team, let me go back to mine here. So I'm surprised. You guys haven't said any of mine yet. I think it's partially because every line I picked, the teams were all at 9.5 wins. I'm trying to kind of take a stand one way or another here. I've got the Chargers under 9.5. I've talked about this a little bit when it comes to fantasy for Herbert. I just think improvement isn't always linear. I think Herbert could be a lot better in his career than he was last year, but I don't think that means he's going to be a lot better than he was last year. He could still have what he did. He could basically do what he did his rookie season and be a very, very good quarterback and have a great year. But I still have concerns about their offensive line. I know they bring in the best center in the NFL last year. I know they took Rashawn Slater, but still got questions at tackle. Slater, while he's talented, he's still a rookie. You don't always know exactly how that's going to work out. And it's funny, like all of the left tackles in this class, this was something that all of Chiefs Twitter was talking about when everyone was looking at the left tackles. They're all like T-Rex armed left tackles compared to like the average NFL left tackle. It wasn't like the strongest offensive line class by any means. So I've got questions there. And then I have some questions in the secondary too. I mean, Derwin James is awesome, and hopefully he comes back from his injury and is awesome, but he's played 5 games the last 2 seasons combined. I think it was something like 299 snaps in the last 2 seasons. So not very much. I just need to see him play a year and be healthy, because they're going to need him to play and be healthy and be awesome for that defense to be any good in the back. Chris Harris was banged up last year. Hopefully he'll be better this year, but he was pretty average even when he played last year. And then the rest of their secondary, pretty uninspiring to me. I just think
Asante Samuel?
And I'm not the biggest Asante Samuel guy. I think their offense is going to have to be really, really good, and they're going to have to win a lot of shootout games. And their offense could be really, really good, and they could win some shootout games. But I look at their schedule, Chiefs twice, and neither one of those games is a week 17 or 18 type of game. So they're going to get a normal Chiefs game both times. They play the Browns, they play the Ravens, they play a Washington football team, which if you've got some questions at tackle, that is not the best team to be playing. And that's week 1. And then they play Dallas, which I took the Dallas under, but I think that'll still be a very good and competitive game and tough game. So I just think I'm taking my stand, and I'm out on the Chargers hitting that over this year.
Yeah, I have to disagree with you on that one. I think that this is probably one I would lean the over on. Brandon Thorne has their offensive line all the way up at 8. So, I mean, he's a pretty big believer in it, and I think he has a pretty good talent evaluation. But also, I think their defense is pretty good. I mean, they have a really good edge rusher in Bosa, probably the 3rd or 4th best in the NFL. And then
their front 7 is good. It's their secondary that I have concerns with.
And then I think I'm a bigger believer in Asante Samuel than you, which is why I asked. And then if Derwin James plays a full season, I mean, the guy has like best safety in the NFL potential
for sure.
When he plays.
I just need to see it.
And then I do trust they bring in the best defensive coordinator from last season who coached for the Rams. His name escapes me.
Again, yes, but that's another X factor here is you've got a first-year head coach. So there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of assumptions you have to make, I think, if you're in on the Chargers. Those assumptions could be right, but I just think that you have to bet a lot on the unknown and a lot on hope with if you're betting the over on the Chargers.
I mean, I think it lines up pretty well. If their biggest struggle is their defense, they have a defensive-oriented coach. They have an offensive-minded offensive coordinator who has a plethora of experience. It's not like it's a college football coach coming in
Sure,
being
no,
tasked
absolutely.
to building this team. I think they
Absolutely.
have good pieces.
So, all right, well, we'll make this side bet then. How about this? I will take the Broncos over the Chargers straight up in the AFC West standings this year.
You'll take the Broncos over the Chargers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you were just going to do the over-under. I have no faith in the Broncos.
I think the Broncos have one of the best defenses in the NFL. They've got great skill guys. I have enough faith in Teddy Bridgewater to at least manage that team. And, you know, we were very afraid of Aaron Rodgers going there for a reason, because they would be a legit Super Bowl team if he was there with all those guys, with all of those guys there. I'm taking the Broncos over the Chargers. What can I say?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I like that a lot.
All right. Me too. I like it too.
Well, all right then. Should we just move on from that?
I lost track of, have we all done two?
You've done two. Everybody else has done one, right?
You've only done one. So
I've only done one. I mean, I guess we're just sticking with the division, but I have another NFC East team here, and this one I was a little unsure of, but I just have to do it. It's the Washington football team. I'm giving them an over of 8.5 wins. Mm-hmm. So last season they were 7-9. They made the playoffs. And they had that awesome game against the Bucs. That was really fun to watch. That's not why I'm picking them. I think they legitimately have a chance to have the best defensive line in the NFL. It's definitely top 5. And they're going to be disruptors. And I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is miles ahead of any quarterback they had last year. No matter what you have to say in that situation, they have the skill position players to really put it together. And then Ron Rivera, in his entire head coaching career, has 2 seasons below 500 at Carolina. And then he had the last year at Washington. Mm-hmm. Very, very good coach. He's very smart when it comes to playmaking, decision making, and how they're going to call it. And then you get the other 3 AFC East teams 6 times. And for all that I've said about Dallas, I think Washington's going to probably match up against them incredibly well, because Dak's just not good under pressure. And this is the team in that division that can generate the most pressure. And then I think they have a pretty good shot against all 3 of the AFC West teams not named Kansas City. So I feel pretty confident that they could really lead to it, because this team has the one kind of X factor that lead to some of those questionable wins, which is when you can really get at the quarterback and really make their life hard. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what it comes down to. And I think Ryan Fitzpatrick can do enough to get them to their wins when their defense does it. Because they had some games last year where if you look at their record, it's like a 13-17 loss. And you're just like, that's just really tough. And it's because their offense couldn't do anything with the turnovers and everything else.
Yeah, to be clear, Fitzpatrick could also lose them some games too. But beside the point, I the reason why I said I've taken Washington in that division is because that defense to me is easily the best unit of any of those units, and that's just what I'm going to trust and fall back on in that division is that defense. And when I think of that defense, I think of mainly Chase Young. It's just so good after the quarterback, like you said, that I'm taking the over and having enough faith in their offense with Fitzpatrick and whoever else plays at quarterback at some point this year, along with Antonio Gibson, along with Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Diami Brown, Logan Thomas. Like they've got talent enough on offense to make it happen too.
And right now, surprisingly, they on FanDuel are plus 260 to win the division. So I think they're a really good bet to win the division. Dallas is plus 130, and the Giants are plus 400, and the Eagles are plus 450. I might flip those two, but
yeah, I would take the Eagles before the Giants, but yeah. I wouldn't take either. I think it's a 2-team race.
Yeah, but I think plus 260 for the Washington football team is a pretty good bet.
Yep, I'm with you, Johnny. Who's your third?
All right, my third is the Bills over 11 games.
Okay.
Yep.
This is a fun one because, Evan, do you want to just tell everybody your dark horse take on the AFC East?
Well, my next team is Dolphins over 9.5, so we can talk about it in tandem here.
Okay.
Go ahead, Johnny. Bills over. I honestly think I would either take the Bills over or like even. I would say like they're a pretty good bet for like 11 wins. Like I would say that's a decent bet.
Yeah, I wasn't like overly confident on the Bills over 11. Like I don't think they'll win like 14, 15 games, but I think 11 is a good number for them. If it was at 10 or 10.5, I would put more money on it. But I feel like the Bills they didn't lose that many guys in free agency. I think they're just kind of chugging and burning along from what they had last year. And I think they're going to probably I think they'll probably win 12, 13 games this year. I think they're 13-3, and that was a really good season for them. And I think they're just going to follow it up with a over 11-win season.
Yep, and I've talked about like with fantasy, like I think last year is probably the best year that we're ever going to see out of Josh Allen. I think that's very possible. Like he still could have very good seasons, but last year was just incredible. I think even the biggest Josh Allen supporter, like in Dalton, would probably say that last year was maybe very well his career year.
Ceiling.
But I think when you're looking at that number at 11, you've already got some regression as a team baked into that number. You aren't getting a 12.5 line like you are with the Chiefs, because they won 13 games like you. So yeah, I don't mind that at all, but I'm taking the Dolphins over 9.5. I told you guys that, and I'm not sure I'd actually bet this, but I would not be shocked if the Dolphins pulled out this division. So just to take a look back at last year, I know we're all so down on Tua, and it's hard not to be after his year, but I want to kind of paint the picture of what last year actually was for Tua and for the Dolphins. So he's coming off of a hip injury, which we know was catastrophic. When it happened, we weren't sure if he's even going to play again. It was like, okay, this guy's like actually like in critical condition, like in the hospital right now, because he's like could bleed out. Like it was that bad. It was very bad. So didn't have a normal offseason because he's recovering. And then you throw COVID in there. They have Fitzpatrick, who is working in a Chan Gailey offense, who they bring out of retirement to come work with Fitzpatrick to build an offense that's going to work for Fitz. They bring in Tua midway through the season, and Brian Flores admitted earlier this offseason, like, yeah, we didn't change anything for Tua. So you had Tua in an offense in midseason as a rookie, coming off an injury, still not totally confident in his body, that is not helping his strengths. It's actually like playing to all of his biggest weaknesses is basically the type of offense he was in last year. And now the offense this season is going to be geared toward him. They were the worst in the NFL last year at receiver separation. So what do? You go get Will Fuller. You bring in Jalen Waddle. I think that problem is pretty much solved right now. I think we get a much better Tua than we got last year. And people are going to be thinking a lot differently about him 6 months from now than they are right now. And also, Johnny, I forgot to look this up. Maybe I'll let you look this up while we keep talking here. Brian Flores, Coach of the Year. What are those odds? I might be willing to consider a wager there. He's 2-0 towards the spread if you're betting the over his first 2 years in Miami. I think he's a great coach. I think the Dolphins are set up for a very good season because the questions last year were not roster related. It was Tua, and I have confidence that is better this year.
He is the second favorite for
behind
Coach
Sean
of the
Payton.
Year, behind Brandon Staley.
Really? So what's Sean Payton?
Ooh, okay, hold on. Next page. Sean Payton is plus 2,200. I think that's 10th.
That's actually not bad because if they win like 9 games, like he's going to have a real shot at Coach of the Year.
Brian Flores is still plus 1,400, which is I think is really good odds. And then
I'm very interested in that. I think if the Bills hit this over, I think and they would make the playoffs probably. I think Flores is a pretty like a top 2 or 3 contender for Coach of the Year.
Dolphins to win the AFC East is plus 330.
See, I'm a little less interested in that. Those aren't like I think it could very easily happen, but those aren't great odds. I think the Coach of the Year stuff is interesting though. Dalton, what do you think about this over?
I mean, my big concern with the Dolphins is it's pretty obvious. We know exactly what they're doing. They want to let Tua hit the deep ball. I mean, their offseason acquisitions make that pretty clear. Mm-hmm. My concern is they by far have the worst offensive line in the NFL. And Tua admitted last year some of the things that went on were just mental. I mean, and I can't blame him for what he went through. But it's the same concern I have with Joe Burrow that, your issue was it's a mental game and that your offensive line is not protecting you. And then you're going to continue to play with the offensive line that's not protecting you. And we saw it even in the preseason that this unit just does not look like it's going to be good.
I think for Tua, though, it was less mental. And I think he said this, not in these exact words, but I think you can glean from his comments. It was less mental as far as like injury stuff and like afraid to get hit, and more like I don't know the playbook. I don't understand what we're doing here right now. I think that was so. You do have the mental stuff like Burrow, but I think it's also not quite apples to apples here.
Yeah, and still my biggest concern is him getting hit a lot. And this offensive line just not playing up to a caliber that keeps him safe and lets the Dolphins get this deep threat offense going.
Those concerns are very real. They also both, they've got guys who can be good yards after the catch guys too and get open. And the short stuff, so that'll help. And my boy Myles Gaskin is definitely going to carry me into this over.
My boy Myles Gaskin. You watch your mouth.
All right, Dalton. I think you're the last one up, and then I've got a couple teams that I'll rattle off when we get out of here.
Well, it's funny you brought up Sean Payton as coach of the year because the Saints have a wonderful 9 over-under, and I'm taking the under. And let me tell you why. We talked about it earlier. Other than the Lions, it's the worst, in my opinion, wide receiver skill tree in the NFL. Their first 8 games now are on the road. Like, that's pretty scary. We saw in the NFL last year what happens when you don't have home field advantage. Teams score a lot more. And this team has really been carried by an elite quarterback in Drew Brees, and they even had their off years. I mean, it is something to talk about that with Drew Brees, this team won 6 games 2 years in a row. And now they are going back with a worse quarterback in Jameis Winston and with better weapons.
Jameis got LASIK.
Yeah, Jameis got LASIK.
I think he'll be better.
Hey, Jameis needs to win MVP for Dalton to catch a certain bet.
You're getting $50. But with Bruce Arians and better weapons, Jameis Winston was able to go 7-9 with the Bucs. And I am not a Sean Payton hater, but Bruce Arians can run a pretty efficient offense. And Sean Payton, I'm a little more skeptical of him putting together an offense that works really well. So Stevie Bear says he can see that. Oh, God. But, I mean, 8 games on the road is just like – that's just a scary start to the season. And then if you have a midseason quarterback change, which is very possible, there is just a very clear path to this.
No shot Jameis loses this job. He's never going to make any mistakes. There's nothing he could do to lose this job.
Can we get the odds of like – are there odds out there for Taysom Hill starting like 3 games? Because I think they should be like minus 200.
So I'll say this is a line that I would stay far away from. And the only reason why I asked about Sean Payton, because I thought he might be the favorite or up there. I wouldn't bet this line. The Saints have maybe the widest range of outcomes for me. I can see like maybe it's like, okay, Sean Payton is a genius. Like that's what's happening this year. And like Jameis Winston is not turning the ball over a million times. And the Saints have had a Super Bowl level defense the last couple of years. I think you could make the argument that it was Drew Brees and the offense that has held them back in the playoffs the last couple of years. So is it possible that Jameis comes in and at least slings all over the place and gets them some regular season wins? It could happen.
It was definitely Drew Brees' fault. The safety missed the tackle and the Vikings scored a touchdown.
To me, that was like 4 years ago. That was a while. But no, I'm thinking more of the last couple. But yeah, I could also see it going in a direction where you've got all the road games. You've got Jameis turning the ball over way too much. You've got receivers who can't get open. You've got a 6-win team. I could see a lot of different things happening. I could see either way. So I'm staying away from this. But hey, if you've got a strong take here, more power to you. I'll lean on you for that one.
I want the Saints to fail. Part of that is personal, 100% disclosure. But other part of it is there's a process I put in place when I came to that conclusion.
So a couple of other teams that I had down that I thought you guys would have. So Chiefs over. Andy Reid's hit the over every year as the Chiefs coach. He's only actually hit the under like once or twice in his entire head coaching career. When you look back at Philly too, which is just ridiculous.
And one bad season got him canned in Philly for some reason too. Just a side note.
The Texans under we hit on. Browns under, I thought for sure Dalton was going to have the Browns under on here. What were they, 10.5?
They were, and I thought someone else was going to do them, so I punted it.
So the Browns, I think they're getting way too much credit for hanging with the Chad Henne Chiefs in the last 2.5 quarters of the playoffs last year, and pounding the self-destructive Steelers in round one.
Well, I was going to say they barely beat the Steelers when the Steelers gave up 21 points in a quarter. And
it was like all turnovers. It wasn't like sometimes it's like, okay, like they actually like caused the turn. It was like the Steelers just handed them the ball 3 times, basically, is what happened.
Yeah, and they're also playing in the AFC North, which is just a brutal division.
They had a negative point differential last year too.
I did not know that. That's a good fact.
So Browns under was another one that I thought for sure you were going to bring up, so I didn't have them on my list, and so those are the only couple that I wanted to just mention.
The one I want to mention, and they were my other punt in case you guys had one of the other teams. I sent this to the group earlier, but 95% of all bettors are on the over for the Titans 9 wins, which seems really, really high.
Well, it's just like I thought about the Titans. I don't like the Titans, but I don't know, unless the team is winning that division, unless a team is winning that division under 500, like somebody's going to win some games in that division, and they're just kind of the best of what's there, right? Like we don't have confidence in the Colts. The Texans, we've mentioned, are very, very bad. And then you have the Jaguars, who, as much as I like Trevor Lawrence, like I don't think they're a real threat to win any more than like 4 or 5 games this year.
Yeah, well, you can pencil them in for 4 wins for sure when it comes to the Titans, I guess, because they play the Texans and the Jags twice.
Yeah, but yeah, the Titans were one I struggled with too, because I wanted to take the under, but it's like I think that division actually could be the worst in football this year.
I agree with you 100%, and I wouldn't be surprised if the team that came out of it was like the Washington football team of last year that was 7-9 and made the playoffs.
I think this is good enough to end it on. I'm with you, Stevie Bear. No one I like more in that division than the Titans. So that is kind of me backing into that. Probably 9 on the nose win total there. And that's going to do it for episode 44 of the Half Point Per Podcast. This was the last offseason show. We are in week 1 mode next week. Next Wednesday night, we'll be recording. We'll be on the live stream. And we've got a full week 1 preview. And then we'll have football to watch on Thursday night, which is incredibly exciting. Felt like a long time coming. It's felt like an especially long offseason, I think, mainly because we started our Dynasty preparations way back in like April of this season. But follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at halfpointperpod, the newsletter, halfpointperpod.substack.com. We'll have stuff coming out on there, and we'll talk to you guys next week for our week 1 preview.